What type of scheme changes can we expect from defensive coordinator Ryan Nielsen compared to what the Falcons have done in recent history?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, and the very humble host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And we thank each and every one of you that makes this illustrious podcast your first listen each and every day. Of course, shout out to my everydayers out there. Make sure you follow their blueprint to success by subscribing or following for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode is a Monday mailbag, and we'll be answering a couple of listener questions towards the end, including whether or not Amari Cooper is a potential option for the Falcons to upgrade their wide receiver position, as well as some other interesting questions related to Jalen Mayfield and Feleipe Franks, everybody's two favorite Falcons. But we'll focus on an initial listener question talking about the Falcons' defensive scheme over the last several years and what kind of changes that we can expect under new defensive coordinator Ryan Nielsen. And of course, this question comes from Cell in the Locked On Falcons Discord. This is what type of defensive scheme did the Falcons have from 2015 to 2022? Also, what type of scheme will we expect in 2023 for the Falcons? So it kind of depends on, how you sort of categorize your defensive schemes, right? Traditionally, historically, people tend to differentiate between defensive schemes by what their fronts are, right? And that has been, 3-4 versus 4-3. But, that has kind of changed in recent years. Because teams are running a lot more hybrid fronts nowadays, right, over the last decade. And, that's meaning that they're taking elements from the 3-4 defense and elements from the 4-3 defense, And under Dan Quinn from 2015 onward, the Falcons were primarily a 4-3 under front, right, which is pretty indistinguishable from what a 3-4 looks like. And I've drawn one up on the board, on the whiteboard behind me. Like, for example, the 3-4 under front that Wade Phillips ran in Houston when he had J.J. Watt, and then with the Rams when he was with Aaron Donald, is very similar to what a 4-3 under front is. And I've drawn it up on a whiteboard, and you can't really tell the difference between, they look pretty much the same front. And really, as I've drawn it up there, the only real difference between those two fronts in the 3-4 under and a 4-3 under is what that weak side pass rusher, who I have squared off on that, in a 3-4, that player stands up, and a 4-3, that player's hands in dirt. And that's really the difference in today's kind of NFL. And so, most teams play a variety of different fronts. You got the 3-4 Okie, the 3-4 Eagle, the 4-3 over, you got bear fronts, all these various things. Everybody's running all the stuff, and they're doing it based primarily off of the opponent and the matchup and all that stuff. And it's not, we just run this particular front all the time. You might have a predominant front, but it's not as sort of cut and dry as it used to be. And nowadays, when you're distinguishing between defenses, at least in my opinion, it's more about what type of coverages you run, even though teams run all the same coverages. But what differentiates this defense from that defense, because they're all kind of hybrid up front, is like, okay, we run more of this coverage shell versus that coverage shell, right? And under Dan Quinn, the Falcons were primarily a cover 3 zone, cover 1 man coverage team, a middle of the field closed defense, right, in terms of their coverages. And there's two types of coverages, broad categories for coverage. There's middle of field closed, where you basically have a safety in the middle of the field deep, or middle of field open, where you don't, right? And, middle field open primarily are cover 2, cover 4, quote unquote split safety looks, middle field close, cover 1, cover 3. And so the Falcons were predominantly a middle of the field closed defense. They'd run cover 3 on early downs. And then, that would allow them to get that 8th defender in the box usually Keanu Neal, at that strong safety to help defend against the run. And then usually on passing downs, they would play man coverage, cover one primarily. Right now, they did dabble in cover two at times, prior to 2019. But then once Raheem Morris kind of took over the play card, they started to veer a little bit more into playing a little bit more cover two. But again, they were still predominantly a cover three, cover one, and primarily under Raheem Morris, they really went hard into the man coverage stuff, right? Now, the past couple of years with DPs, the Falcons have tried to be a little bit more of that middle of the field open split safety sort of covered, but last year they were predominantly a cover three defense, right? And I've been charting the defense since 2019, and 2022 saw them play more cover three than anything else. 40% of the pass plays that I charted, the Falcons were playing some form of cover three. In 2019, that was 35%. In 2020, that was 30%. In 2021, that was only 25%. Now, last year also featured the lowest percentage of man coverage that the Falcons have played since I started charting, which was 28%. In 2019, that was 46%. 2020, that was 41%. In 2021, that was 35%. So how exactly will this type of scheme, now that you understand where we've been, what direction are we going? And we'll break down exactly what my expectations are for what Ryan Nielsen is going to change here, but we don't 100% know. But I think we can make some educated guesses on what Nielsen has said he wants to do, as well as what the Saints have done under defensive coordinator Dennis Allen the last couple of years, as to what we will likely see the Falcons do this season and into the future. And we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons, guys. But first, I want to tell you to go ahead and make a fast break to FanDuel for the NBA Finals, because right now new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets, even if your first bet doesn't win. And whether you want to bet on the NBA playoffs, the NBA draft, you want to bet on the upcoming NFL season, whether that's Super Bowl, who's going to win the NFC South, is Bijan going to win the Offensive Rookie of the Year, all that and more. And of course, you can bet on Major League Baseball. And I love their parlay builder, because you can bet a little to win a lot. And you can find it all at America's #1 sportsbook over at FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get that no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So, in terms of what the Falcons will look like, understanding, let's start talking about the fronts again, right? Again, they've insisted publicly, Arthur Smith and Ryan Nielsen, that will be a hybrid. That's why they've been vague about, are they a 3-4? Are they a 4-3? Because it doesn't really matter anymore. They're going to do both, right? My suspicion is that we'll see a lot of 3-4 under. We'll see a lot of 4-3 under, as I've outlined before. That will basically determine that weak side pass rusher, which will probably be Arnold Ebiketie or Bud Dupree. And, traditionally in the 4-3 under scheme, that player is referred to as the Leo, right? In the 3-4, as I understand it, the Falcons referred to that guy. That was the Terrell Suggs role. That was the jack linebacker, primarily a pass rusher. And, they'll be in the 3-4 when Ebiketie or Dupree are standing up. They'll be in a 4-3 when one of those guys puts their hand in dirt. And that's really the difference. That will probably be their primary, but they'll run a lot of different fronts and all that sort of stuff. It again, as I said earlier, it really doesn't matter at this point in time what your fronts are. It's really more about the coverages, because, again, it's a passing league and whatnot. Now, I think the biggest change we can expect on Ryan Nielsen is you can expect the Falcons to run a lot more man coverage than they have under the last couple of years in the DBs. Now, I don't know exactly what that number is going to look like. My guess is it will be more than what we ran in 2021, which was 35%, but probably less than what we ran in 2019, which was 46%. Now, the Saints ran 46, 48, 52, 55% man coverage at various points over the last couple of years. I don't expect the Falcons to go all the way in on that man coverage to the same degree that the Saints have in recent years, but I do expect it to be a relatively high percentage. And that's usually about anything over, I think the league average is like 32, somewhere around that percent. So 35, 40% is certainly above average man coverage. And I expect the Falcons, let's say roughly 40%. Now, I think you'll also see one of the changes that Ryan Nielsen does is moving towards more middle of the field open coverages, those split safety looks. Than we saw last year, right? We saw a lot of that in 2021 under DPs, not as much last year under DPs. I think we'll get more of that in 2023 under Ryan Nielsen. But more importantly, what you're going to see a lot more of is cover 2-man, or 2-man under, as some people refer to it, or cover 5, as I've heard other people refer to it. That is, you have 2 high safeties and you play man defense under. That's why it's 2-man under, right? And for my charting the last 4 years, the Falcons have never played more than like 1, 2, or 3% of their coverages being that 2-man under coverage. And when you look at the Saints pretty consistently were running at like 20 or more % of the time the last couple of years. So let's imagine, say the Falcons run like 40% man coverage this year. Don't be surprised if like 20% of that, 20% is 2-man under, 20% is cover 1, right? It'll be, the Saints have consistently led the league in terms of 2-man under coverage the last couple of years and running roughly 20%. So I expect that number to go way up, right? We're going from a team that's running that 1 to 2% of the time most years to potentially 15, 20 or more % of the time this upcoming season. And then when the Falcons aren't running man coverage, when they're in their zone coverage, right? Whether that's going to be 40% of the time, like it often is with the Saints, or is that 60% of the time, somewhere in that range, probably in more likelihood, the Falcons will probably be a little bit more leaning on their middle of the field open man coverages rather than those middle field close. So that's going to be more cover 2, zone, cover 4 or quarters rather than cover 3. Now the Saints, from the most recent data season that I have the complete data, ran roughly an equal percentage of all 3 of those coverages, right? Roughly 10, 12, somewhere in that range percentage of those coverage splits. But because most teams in the league run a lot more cover 3, the Saints have consistently been at the bottom of the league in terms of cover 3 usage. And you kind of know that Ryan Nielsen, we're going to dial back our cover 3 usage significantly, especially from last year, where we were running at what 40% of the time, I think is the number I said. 40%. That may be like 10, 15% this year. And the reason why you know that is because Ryan Nielsen has already said we're going to play with light boxes. And that typically refers to one of the reasons why the cover 3 has been so popular over the last decade is that 8th defender, that strong safety, the Keanu Neal, the Cam Chaser, can come in and defend at that 8th guy in the box, right? From the traditional 7-man front that you have, whether that 7th guy is a nickel corner or a linebacker in your base versus nickel defense, right? You can bring that 8th man into box. And the reason why that matters, guys, for those of you that don't know, and this is where we will get into analytics on this podcast. I know we've been spurning that over the last, 6+ weeks on this podcast, but the analytics will tell you that the number one factor in determining the success or failure of a run play is how many defenders in the box, right? Rather than the quality of your offensive line, the quality of your running back. And so what defenses try to do schematically is they try to have even numbers in the box, right? Like, so your traditional run play, just to briefly explain, right? You'll have your 5 offensive linemen blocking, you'll have your tight end blocking, and then you'll have your running back. So you'll have 7 guys involved in the run play that the defense has to account for, right? And so what the defense wants to do is they want to have 7 guys in the box, and have an 8th guy in the box so that they can, even if the offense perfectly executes their block, there's going to be 1 free defender to make the tackle, right? Even if the running back makes that 7th defender miss in the hole, that 8th defender is going to be able to make the tackle and limit the run play, right? And this is why the quarterback run game is so hard for defenses to defend, because traditionally you don't have to account for the quarterback because he just hands the ball off and moves away, right? But now if the quarterback can run the football, then you have to account for him, and now you have to you won't get even in it. All of a sudden, if they bring a fullback onto the field, or a second tight end onto the field, it's going to be really hard for you to count for all those blockers and whatnot. And so that's going to put you at a disadvantage in the running game. But, right, that's a big reason why teams have preferred the cover 3 historically, because it allows you, especially on early downs, you can better defend against the run, because that's predominantly when teams run the football. But what Nielsen is saying, playing with lighter boxes, this is where the league is going towards, because instead of playing that cover 3 where you can bring that second safety into the box, right? You're playing the split safety stuff, cover 2, cover 4, whatever, and that safety is not going to be a factor in the run defense. And so you'll never be able to get more than 6 or 7 guys in your box. And so that's why you kind of get bigger guys up front in order to sort of offset the fact that you're never going to be having equal numbers in the box to defend the run, right? So you need, playmakers. And when you have Aaron Donald, that's one of the reasons why, the Staley defense that Brandon Staley brought to LA, when you have a player like Aaron Donald, it becomes a lot easier, because he's basically worth 2 defensive players. So you can kind of cover that mistake, but that's a whole separate issue. So basically all that to explain, we're going to play with lighter boxes, which is basically which is Nielsen telling us we're not going to rely as much on cover 3. We're going to rely a lot more on cover 2 with that 8th defender not being in the box with those split safety coverages. So that is something that you can expect. That's the reason why the league is going towards that. If I didn't make it clear, is because teams want to stop the explosive plays. It's designed because teams are passing the ball more on early downs rather than running the football. You want to stop those explosive pass plays, and playing that cover 2 or cover 4 is better at limiting those explosive plays on early downs than playing the cover 3 is. But this is also part of the reason why teams like the Falcons offensively are kind of zigging while the rest of the league is zagging, right? And that's why we're going to run the football. Okay, you're going to play with the light boxes. We're going to pound it down your throat, right? Now we can run the ball effectively. So it's kind of an arms race, that sort of thing. Again, this is something that we will probably get deeper into the future. And I'm sure, by all means, leave me a comment if you want me to go deeper into it. I by no means an expert, but I can at least explain it to you as I understand it the best way I can, so that at least we can be on the same page in terms of our understanding of it. Maybe we won't necessarily be on the same page with some of the defensive gurus and experts in the league out there, but at least we will come to accord here on Locked On Falcons. But that's where we're going to leave the scheme changes. I hope that makes it clear. Just in summary, more man coverage, less cover 3. That's primarily what the biggest change that we'll see, more cover 2 man specifically in terms of man coverage, and less cover 3. Right. That's probably the biggest change that you'll expect, is just like take out a lot of the cover 3 and replace that with cover 2 man. And that's kind of the Ryan Nielsen defense that you can expect. There will be other tweaks and changes, and obviously we'll break that down as we get that information during the season in the film and certain things. But that's the primary difference that we will see Ryan Nielsen implement here in Atlanta versus what we have seen in Atlanta the last several years. Right. So we will continue today's episode getting into some of the listener questions, including whether or not, Amari Cooper with the Cleveland Browns should be our latest wide receiver obsession for the Falcons to acquire, as well as whether it's more likely that Feleipe Franks will score a touchdown or Jalen Mayfield will actually become a good tackle now, if that is his new position. And we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. But of course, guys, want to give a shout out to my everydayers. Continue to follow their blueprint by subscribing to Locked On Falcons on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want to send your questions to be answered on the podcast, of course, you can leave a comment here on YouTube. You can hit me up in the Locked On Falcons Discord, a link in the description below, or you can hit me up on social media at Locked On Falcons on Facebook or Twitter, as well as send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com. So our first question comes from Spacebar in the Discord. He says, since getting the news about the Falcons moving Mayfield back to right tackle, it got me thinking about a couple of shocking outcomes this year. I have 2 that come to mind. Number 1, Feleipe Franks scores a tutty. And number 2, Mayfield, probably due to injuries, sees playing time at tackle and looks decent. Which do you think is more likely? So, it's hard for me to bet against Dwayne Ledford, since he has been a miracle worker based off what he did last year. And so if he can pull off what you're saying and Mayfield goes back to being a tackle and looks decent, that will solidify Dwayne Ledford as the greatest coach that's ever walked the face of the earth. But I would probably say the number 1, Frank scoring a touchdown, is more likely than those 2. No offense, Jalen Mayfield. When I watched this tape at Michigan, I did not see a guy that could survive as a tackle in the NFL. And as good as I think Dwayne Ledford is, I don't think he's actually performing miracles, which to me, that's kind of what it would be. But given that Michael Pruitt scored like 4 touchdowns and the Falcons were able to scheme those plays up, then I think they can pretty easily scheme up Feleipe Franks to get 1 touchdown on like a tight end throwback or something in the red zone or something like that. So That seems much more likely because that's much easier to do, if you ask me. But our next question comes from Letterbomb in the Discord. He says, with Avery Williams out for the season, what are the odds that we see Bijan taking regular season snaps at punt returner? Extremely low. That's something I think you will see in OTAs when, practice, right? As Allen Iverson would say, we're talking about practice. I don't think you'll see that once we get to training camp and once we get to the regular season. I think that's just something the Falcons are able to experiment with in OTAs when, I'm not going to say nothing matters, but like relatively speaking, it doesn't matter. Like you can try stuff then. Our last question is an email from Ali Khan L. He asks, I read that the Browns are thinking about releasing Amari Cooper. Not sure how legitimate this source was. He is 28. While not blazing fast, he did run a 4.42. I don't know if he would fit in Atlanta, but if the Corey Davis acquisition that I'm patiently anticipating with you does not happen, what are your thoughts on bringing Amari Cooper to Atlanta? And Ali Khan was the person who asked the question last month, and I forgot his name. And hopefully, Ali Khan, I got the pronunciation of your name, so I did remember the name correct. So send me another email if I got the pronunciation correctly. But I'm not sure where your information is coming from. I did some research. I know there was some talk before the offseason, like back in January, February, that maybe Amari Cooper would be a cap cut, but it doesn't seem like that's been a thing. Maybe this is coming from the Browns using their top pick on Cedric Tillman in the third round this year. Maybe that's caused people to speculate a little bit more about Amari Cooper's future. But from everything I've read, Cooper is pretty much safe in Cleveland through this season. Maybe after this upcoming season, they could move on from him. I know Donovan Peoples-Jones is a free agent. There's been talk that they probably won't be extending him, and that's part of the reason why they drafted Cedric Tillman. I think it was more of a, let's get a better number 2 in here than let's replace Amari Cooper as our number 1 when it comes to that. But Cooper, because he was traded to the Browns, has cap hits of like $24 million this year and next year, and then his contract expires at the end of the 2024 season. And what it sounds like is the Browns are hoping, from what I've read from like people like Tony Grassi, who covers the Browns, is that they're kind of hoping to ride out Cooper for these next 2 years. And then hopefully in 2025, when Cooper's contract expires, by that point, Cedric Tillman or somebody else, Elijah Moore or whoever, has kind of emerged as their go-to number 1 wide receiver. But it doesn't sound like the Browns have any intention of moving on from Amari Cooper until somebody else emerges as a clear-cut number 1, which Amari Cooper is there. And not to mention that there's kind of some pressure on the Browns this season, because there's been speculation, is Kevin Stefanski on the hot seat? If they don't make the playoffs this year, is he out? All that stuff. So there's a lot of moving parts there. Like, if they bring in a different coach or a different general manager, do they move on from Amari Cooper? Don't know those answers, but it doesn't sound like the Browns are eager to pay Amari Cooper at some point in the next couple of years. So they'll just kind of ride out these next 2 years, maybe restructure his contract a little bit. Because if you got to pay Amari Cooper, you're going to pay like 20 and potentially like $25 million a year. And so, that's going to be a problem for, I think, a team like the Falcons, because I don't know if the Falcons want to get into bed with any $20 million a year wide receiver. If they're going to pay $20 million a year to a receiver, I think it's going to be someone in-house, a Kyle Pitts, a Drake London in a year or two down the road, rather than going out there and getting Amari Cooper. But to answer your question, all that circumstance, money, all that stuff aside, in terms of Amari Cooper's fit in Atlanta, I think he would be a great fit. I think he is an Arthur Smith kind of receiver. He's historically been a very effective vertical receiver, although you wouldn't necessarily categorize him as a true burner. And certainly, I think he was a much better vertical threat with the Raiders than he has been the last couple of years with the Browns and Cowboys. And he's been more of a possession receiver, but he's a very good possession receiver, very good route runner, very good on ISO routes, good on third downs, good in the red zone. He can block a little bit, contested catch receiver. So there's a lot of overlap between, like, you can make an argument that Amari Cooper is what we hope Drake London can turn into, but Cooper has a little bit more juice than Drake London does. So he's a much more effective yards after catch guy and vertical threat than probably what Drake London is in this league. Drake London is a little bit bigger, but like, that type of ISO, number one beat one-on-one coverage. And I remember we talked about this in the Discord over the weekend, and we were talking about Dak Prescott and why his play dropped off. And I don't think it's a coincidence that losing kind of the go-to guy in that Cowboys offense in Amari Cooper, and Dak started throwing interceptions because he was forcing the ball because he didn't have that security blanket. So I think Amari Cooper could be a very good addition here in Atlanta. Whether the Falcons want to pay Amari Cooper $20 million in order to facilitate that move to happen in a world where he is, available in free agency or due to being cut, I think I'd be skeptical of that. But I certainly think in a world where, money didn't matter or draft picks and trades didn't matter. Yeah, I do think Amari Cooper would be a very good fit for the Falcons because he just checks a lot of the boxes in terms of, playing that ball control, run heavy style of offense that Arthur Smith wants to play. So that hopefully answers your question, Ali Khan. I don't think Amari Cooper's going anywhere in Cleveland, at least not through this season. Next year, we'll have to sort of see what the situation is with that coaching staff, that front office, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, all that and more. And then maybe we'll see Amari Cooper come free at that point, but not until after this upcoming season. But certainly, would be an upgrade because he's one of the top 15 receivers in the NFL. And that wouldn't describe Corey Davis. That certainly doesn't describe Hunter Renfrow. So he would be a much better, just from a pure pound for pound, acquisition would be a better fit there. So that's going to do it for us, guys. If you have any questions that you want to have answered, of course, you know where to find me in the Discord, email, leave a comment, Twitter, Facebook. Just basically search Locked On Falcons on whatever platform you're looking to contact me, and you will probably find a way to contact me for future Q&As. I don't know what tomorrow's episode exactly will be. I haven't necessarily wrapped up my DeMarco Hellams film study, so we'll probably push that to like Wednesday or Thursday, but we'll just sort of have to see. So we'll talk about something, right? So that's an opportunity for you guys to kind of steer the ship with some of your listener questions. So that is going to do it for us here. Continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen, and check out the Locked On NFL podcast for your second listen. Find it all on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.